This is Blind Like Me.
Hello, everyone.
Interviews, information, and reviews related to living with a vision disability. Your host is Tim Black. Tim has been visually impaired since birth. He's been in radio for 30 years and also hosts the podcast Inside Today's Country. Tim has never let his lack of vision stand in his way.
Well, hi, and welcome to another edition of Blind Like Me. We hope you've had a fantastic week. I am Tim Black. Thanks for listening to us wherever you find your favorite podcast. We'd love it if you give us a like and a follow. And we'd love it even more if you'd give us a share. On this week's episode, we chat with Brian and Kerry Kijewski. Brian and Kerry are a totally blind brother and sister living in Ontario. I connected with them via a Facebook group for the Canadian Federation of the Blind. They both went through regular school. They have a very interesting story to tell, and they've got a radio show in Ontario at the University of Western called Outlook. We welcome Brian and Kerry to Blind Like Me.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us, yeah.
First of all, let's start with Brian. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your vision or lack thereof, and then we'll talk to Kerry and ask the same questions.
All right. Yeah, I was born back in the 80s. I'm 33 years old, so I was born blind. Kerry and I actually both have the. She was born 3 years before me, but was born with Leber's congenital amaurosis. So barely any sight. I can see a little bit of light and dark and a little bit of shadow, but that's it. And later on in life, around the age of 11 or 12, when Kerry was diagnosed actually with kidney failure, and then they checked into me and realized I had the same. Turned out that this all wraps up into an entire syndrome that we both have called senior Loken syndrome. It's very rare. It's a genetic disease, and it's very, very rare. You can look it up online. It's Loken, senior Loken syndrome. Mm-hmm. So I was born with the blindness, so I've been blind all my life, obviously, and grew up in regular elementary public school and high school, mm-hmm. which I'm really happy that my parents made that decision. It was a big kind of fight at the time because mm-hmm. I grew up in near Woodstock, Ontario, out pretty much in the country. And there were schools, we went to a school in the country growing up. Kind of hard to get integrated into the system at the time, but our mom was very persistent and fought for us to be there. And I just think in the end, it really helped out. It kind of allowed me to feel like I fit in with everyone else, was lucky to make lots of friends growing up in school. And it was just all around, it was a great experience. After graduating high school, I kind of took quite a few years off. I was kind of just exhausted from school and wanted to get out on my own and live on my own independently as a blind person. So I moved to Toronto, which is quite a big difference from
Woodstock to Toronto. There's a big jump.
A big change. I've only had one guide dog, and my guide dog at the time didn't really like the change that much. Mm-hmm. Kind of hard for her to get used to, but I really liked it. I've always been a huge fan of music since about 8 or 9 years old. I kind of picked up a guitar that was lying around the house and started playing a little bit growing up. So I moved to Toronto after high school for, I guess, over 6 years. There, played a bunch of shows, got used to living on my own. It was a huge adjustment, cooking and cleaning and mm-hmm. all that stuff that comes with being an adult, all the fun stuff or not so fun stuff. But it was a really good learning experience. And in some ways, I wish I had went straight to college after high school, but it took that time because it allowed me to grow up a bit, get experience living on my own and taking care of things. And so eventually I did actually end up moving back to London, Ontario, which is where I live now. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons being I currently was on dialysis. My first kidney had failed at that point. And so I was on the waiting list. And in Toronto, they said it could take up to 10 more years, whereas in London, they said it could be a lot sooner. So I figured a new kidney. I'm sick of this dialysis. So I'm going to move to London. And then the other reason being I wanted to start school. I'd looked into the program here in London, Ontario at Fanshawe College, the music industry arts program. I looked into that back in 2005 when I graduated high school, but I was very discouraged then because, all those programs use Pro Tools generally, which is like a industry default digital audio workstation. And at the time, Mac computers weren't very accessible for blind people. Kind of a letdown where I just didn't think I'd be able to get in. And even if I did, it would be really difficult. But by 2013, I'd heard a lot more that Pro Tools had improved quite a bit. And so I applied for the course. I had to take a year of general arts first just because I had no post-secondary education. And it's a very competitive course. But then in 2014, I got into music industry arts.
Excellent.
And, it was a kind of a dream of mine to do. And then took me an extra year due to a few things, but I graduated in 2017 from that program. And now I host a radio show with my sister, which we'll get into more detail about later on, called Outlook. And I also, originally I started my own music radio show here in London at Radio Western, the university station here in London. The show is called Chin Music. So you can actually find that on Facebook.
Excellent. Well, wow, what a story. And so many questions I have there, but I want to talk to the lovely and talented sister. So Kerry, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Born 3 years before him. So I'm currently 36. We have 2 older siblings who can see, actually.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, our parents weren't expecting this when I came along. It took a few months. My mom realized that something wasn't quite right with how my eyes were developing or something, and she got it checked out, and then they got quite the surprise. So I was growing up, and I had more sight than Brian. So I was always, compared to what I am now, it feels like I had perfect vision. Like I could see to draw, and I was a big fan of markers and bright colored pencils, and so I loved visual art when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was in public school, like Brian said, and ups and downs until the kidney failure at age 12. So yeah, teen years for everybody are difficult, but it was an extra added thing, surgeries and things. But I actually also developed some chronic pain in my teen years, and so that sort of derailed me a little bit for a while until I discovered writing as the vision I had started failing, sort of slowly over time. I had to let go of being able to see colors, and that's how I discovered words. And definitely since my 30th birthday, when I started a blog, started to not be so afraid all the time of rejection and things like that come along with writing and life. But I found that writing was the best way to express, use that visual muscle that our siblings are pretty artistic also. So.
What do you do nowadays?
So now, like Brian said, the last couple of years, we've gotten involved with more activism with the Canadian Federation of the Blind. And so I became the secretary for the Ontario chapter when we started in 2017. And since then, I've started working on their magazine, which is called The Blind Canadian. I'm the assistant editor there now.
Okay. And
I'm a freelance writer. And like Brian said, he and I started doing audio storytelling, which we grew up with cassette tapes and sounds, recording people and sound, to capture our memories and things. So we still like to do that as an adult. So this is a good way of still getting to do stuff sort of like that. But with Brian, I wanted to start a podcast, and with Brian's ability to, make things sound good, and my job, I guess, as producer, coming up with ideas and things like that, and interview skills, which we're both, trying to work on with our podcasting, which evolved into Outlook on Radio Western.
That's very cool. I applaud both of you for what you're doing and what you guys have overcome. It's, you don't hear often that it's a brother and sister that are going through this. Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, for Brian, the fact that, okay, so your sister went through regular school. Was there doors that were kind of broken down for you after the fact that Kerry had gone through school? Was it easier for you, or was it harder?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part about her being 3 years older than me, which is maybe good for me, but not always great for her, is she has been kind of the guinea pig in a lot of gone through these things first. And I do think for the schooling, it was, she definitely led the way for that. So it did make it easier for me to transition in. Plus a little bit easier too when there's 2 blind people in a school. So the Braille teacher and the people coming to work with us, there's not just one person, there's 2. So it makes it a little even more easier for them. But it just, yeah, she definitely through our mom and then through Kerry going through it first, it definitely made the transition easier on a whole.
Kerry, what was it like for you, obviously being the leader of this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the sort of struggle that Brian is sort of referencing here are, like we said, our parents and our mom had to fight school board things, and to get us these specialist teachers. She learned a bit of Braille, but she wanted us to have a Braille teacher and help in the classroom and things. No, going first, I've always kind of considered it an honor, so I don't mind. I joke about it, and I had my rough times, but it was always just nice to know he was there too, so I wasn't really alone. So.
That was going to kind of lead me into the next question. I mean, did you guys kind of, get tired of having each other in the same school, or was it kind of a comfort to have each other there?
I would say a bit of both, because it was nice to have her. Like I said, she's definitely out of everyone, and she's the one I connect with the most, obviously, because of the things we've gone through and all of that. So that it was nice to have her at school, although we were 3 years apart, so we weren't close enough in age that I didn't really see her too much at school when I was at school. I had my own friends and own class, so we would take we would ride the bus together, and for a while there we were kind of just not being able to see. We were both they put us in the second seat from the front just for routine and all this stuff, and so we were. Maybe there was part of me that was like, oh, I don't know why I wish I could be on my own and stuff. I would say on a whole, it was a positive thing.
Now, Kerry, let's talk about independence, because Brian said obviously he moved from Woodstock to Toronto. What was independent living like for you when you first started off? Well,
Brian, we joke that I've been the leader in all of this just because of my age, obviously, and all these things. But in as far as independence in adulthood, Brian sort of surpassed me a long time ago, and I've always sort of looked to him and switched it up on him and looked to him in a lot of ways, because he experienced some of the stuff that I just, like I sort of said there, with chronic pain and other things, some of the markers I missed, that he got to have the young adulthood that I kind of seemed to have skipped a little bit. But for me, it was not quite as adventurous at all. I couldn't live in Toronto, I don't think. I like visiting, and I like being able to visit my brothers who lived in Toronto, and we're doing that. It's exciting and stuff, but I couldn't have lived there. So Brian was always better at that, it felt like, and so I let him take the lead. And so for me, it was basically staying a little closer to home. My sister and I bought a house together in 2006, but just in our town, the one sort of near where we grew up, where we went to high school here in Woodstock. So her and I lived together until she ended up getting married and moving back to our childhood home with her family. So now it's me living on my own in this house, and it's not as far away. I have family nearby, which I always find to be a comfort and stuff, but I'm able to still do that a bit. But I've always looked to Brian, like, traveling and taking, being more adventurous, traveling to Toronto. I would be so afraid to do it on my own, but yet I was happy to follow Brian. Sometimes I tagged along with him. For Brian, what was the biggest, one of the biggest challenge for you living on your own and moving to the big city?
I think at the time, the big one was just being, I think the big city overall I thrived in, because being so into music, and I'm particularly into sort of underground indie music, so stuff that's beyond the mainstream. So Toronto was such a great city because there were so many shows, so many bands would come there. So I was in that environment, and I just felt the energy there, and I really loved that. I would say just living on your own in general is a huge adjustment for anyone. And then being blind, it just added something else to that. Like, originally when I moved out, I lived with a couple friends, and, I made pizza pops in the microwave. Like, that was pretty much the extent of my cooking when I was 19 years old. But then, over time, when you're on your own, you realize, I can't live off this forever. I gotta learn how to cook. So I kind of just, through experimenting and asking my mom a lot of questions and just doing it, I got better at cooking. I think at that time the big challenge was the guide dog. She came with me to Toronto for a while, but I was too young at the time. It was too much to take care of, so I ended up sending her back. My mom, being such a nice, understanding person, she took care of my dog while I lived in Toronto, because it became too much. And I had it there for the first while, but it just, if you're having trouble taking care of yourself, which can be a bit of an issue living independently, it's hard to take care of a dog as well. So I think a lot of it just takes confidence. And, you know, when I moved there originally, I wasn't very confident I would take cabs everywhere, but eventually it's just like got orientation and mobility lessons to get a little bit of an idea. And then from there, I kind of do a lot of my travel just by trial and error and practice. So kind of just working on my confidence and just going out and doing it, because you only learn by doing and making mistakes. So yeah, kind of just took a lot of practice. And
do you have a dog now?
No, actually, I had one guide dog, and I got her actually quite young when I was 14. The school in Quebec called Mira, they would give guide dogs to any age based on someone's skills more so than their age. So I went there in the summer of 2001, had the dog, and worked great for high school, just with busy hallways and everything. It was really nice to have, but then, yeah, just wasn't quite the fit. And then after she retired in 2010, I just have thought about it in the future, but like too big of a rush to get another dog, because it is another responsibility and a lot of work.
Certainly.
It has its benefits, but I also in some ways like the cane too. So yeah, I haven't yet, maybe someday.
Kerry, what's one of the pieces of technology that you use every day?
Definitely my iPhone, I would say. It's just nice. I was thinking about it the other day that several years ago, you wouldn't, if texting was a thing, it wouldn't have been maybe so inclusive where it, you know, so it's nice that there are phones that allow us, it's become such a common everyday thing for people, and we can be part of that and be able to just, you know, do what anybody else is doing.
Brian, what about you?
I would say it's kind of a simple one, but the music app for me, as I mentioned earlier, music's my main passion in life. And just now that everything is so accessible, it's amazing how I can, if stuff's not on Apple Music, I can upload it. But if it is, then I can just add it to my iCloud, and then it all syncs with my computer and my phone. So it's just amazing that way. I mean, I have 60,000 songs in my iCloud right now. So
wow.
By that, how obsessive I am about that. And then I would say the other big one for me too is Facebook. And the main thing for me with Facebook is I just think it's really great for connecting and promoting, and with music in particular. It just allows everything to be in one place instead of having to go to all sorts of different websites. I can follow hundreds of bands on there and then automatically hear when they have new music and, you know, keep up on all of that. So I find it's a great way for me to keep up on a lot of things. Let's
talk a little bit about Facebook, because you guys, obviously how we connected was through a Facebook group. You guys got to hear me talk about a year ago, a part of an event that was happening for the Canadian Federation of the Blind, and we've actually had them on this podcast. Let's talk a little bit about the Canadian Federation of the Blind. Kerry, you're involved, obviously, putting the magazine together. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts.
It was a different presentation. It's a different purpose, and it feels like you find a community. Everybody still has their own opinions, but it's nice to have a group of people that you come to care about, and it helps you not feel alone. Like as an adult, sometimes you feel, and Canada's such a big country, so many provinces and territories and things, that we just found this place that helped us, I guess, feel like, I felt like finally I could be with my writing, plus what I've learned from mentors I met through there. You know, I've learned about advocacy and how to better speak for myself. So it's the organized blindness movement is just a different concept than I was ever told about before. And it just came around like the perfect time, I think. And I just think it's a good way to educate people. Like I said, with our magazine, I'm proud that we have that publication, to show what Canadians who are blind get up to like everyone else.
Talk to me a little bit more about the magazine. Where is it going to go? Who's going to be able to get it?
So we release it on our website, cfb.ca, if you want to read it there digitally. And we do have a certain amount of copies printed, so that we usually aim for 2 issues a year, every 8 months or so, kind of it ends up being. And with COVID this year, we're a bit tossed around and having to do things differently. But it's nice having print copies that we can hand out at like events and things. And I've been able to, use my writing skill for that, plus learning how to editing skills through the woman who's been running it. And I just think it's a great publication. Usually it's easier to read online, obviously, if you're blind or visually impaired.
Excellent. Brian, talk to me about the Canadian Federation of the Blind for yourself.
Yeah, so I guess it was introduced to us by our good friend Eric, who we've known actually since Kerry got her guide dog back in 1998. So we've known him for a long time, and he was also, he had heard about the NFB, which is pretty much the same organization, but the U.S. version, the National Federation of the Blind. So he had heard about it and recommended it to us. So I got involved through that, and yeah, it really just became this sense of family that I never, growing up with the CNIB and mobility and all that stuff, like I met some amazing people and it was a great help while I grew up. But I just, with the CFB, I felt like it was a lot more inclusive, and it had a very welcoming, friendly family kind of environment and feel to it. So I really like that about it. And that ties into the mentoring part. And I just really like, it's tough to distinguish sometimes and remember, but how it's the Canadian Federation of the Blind rather than for the blind, because that makes me realize that anyone to know that it's comprised of blind people, or at least those are the voting members. Anyone can join this organization.
Right.
But it gives it, instead of saying it's for us, where it's like people are in a sense taking care of us, this is kind of us taking care of ourselves and working together. So it's just that whole democratic, group-oriented getting together and all that kind of really inspired me. And then especially going, we've been to both CFB conventions out in British Columbia, and then we also went to the NFB convention in Orlando back in 2018. And for me, that was a really eye-opening experience, like being in a hotel with 3,000 other blind people, like especially not even growing up in a school for the blind or anything. I had a couple blind friends, but I didn't really know that many blind people. So I found like this was just such an empowering, the fact that I believe so much in independence, and this just really, it really opened my eyes and realized how much potential blind people do have, and how we have to work on advocating, and we have to all work together, or else things won't change. So
do you guys both find that as a blind community, we aren't connecting as much as we possibly should be?
Canada is a big country, but yet compared to the U.S., we're not very good at speaking for ourselves. If you want something to get done, you start to realize, I have as I gotten older, that a lot of this is sort of systemic, and it's in society, and it often starts with politicians that don't understand our issues. Generally speaking, we are known as to be a little bit more passive than a country like the United States. So I think it's a little harder to convince people, and could work together more. And I mean, it's a tough for so many people, and everyone has different opinions, and it's, there are also so many organizations out there that it's hard sometimes to convince people. But I still always truly feel like going to that NFB convention in the States really opened my eyes to realize that just seeing how organized it is there, with so many groups for so many different issues, and they're all blind people, and they're all, making these decisions and contacting people in Parliament and doing all this stuff that I've just never done, that it just really inspired me and made me realize that Canada could be better for blind people, but we have to be the ones doing it, not expecting our sighted peers or other people to be making these decisions and getting involved.
Let's talk a little bit about your radio show. The title is
Outlook.
Now tell me a little bit about Outlook, Kerry.
So yeah, we don't really think we would have had the idea to do it without first getting involved with Canadian Federation of the Blind. Maybe we would have eventually got there, but Brian was already doing his radio show. Yeah, we just found we had the perfect place to do it, and we were offered the chance. And so we thought it would be a good way to get our message further than we were with our podcast, being able to have a space on our, radio dial. Anybody in London driving through town or whatever could hear us. And it just became this great opportunity that we really couldn't pass up.
So who are you guys targeting? Who are you talking to?
Our sort of motto is accessibility, advocacy, and equality. So those are the three things we sort of talk about on Outlook. And it's from our blind perspective, but we like to talk disability in broader terms.
I would say it's made for everyone. Definitely blind listeners, but even more so in some ways, sighted listeners, because it's kind of like what how we say this show was inspired by the Canadian Federation of the Blind. We want to more so educate people, and it can be tough to do sometimes without coming off too harsh or too but controlling. But we're trying to be like, we're both not very serious people. We're pretty laid back and stuff when we want to be. So we try to keep it laid back, but we also do try to educate and make the greater public aware of things. Like, for example, that, you know, I'm practically totally blind, but I can work a console at a radio station and do all the things it takes to put a show out like that. And so it's just very invigorating to get out to anyone, but especially the sighted people. And you know, it's been great to get some interviews. We've had interviews with both blind people and sighted people who have worked with blind people. And, you know, with our mom, we interviewed on the show. Kerry's former violin teacher who was sighted, we interviewed her on the show. It was really interesting. We interviewed someone recently, Ben Fulton, who had a guide dog discrimination case going on. So that was a really interesting.
I heard that one actually. Yeah.
Oh, right on.
What's next for you guys?
It's kind of tricky right now. You know, we had big ideas, or at least I usually throw out the ideas about what we wanted to do. You know, looking to future, you know, as a writer for freelance, I'm getting used to pitching stories and things. So I was like planning this big plan. It was going to pitch CBC because we thought we needed more representation there. And now COVID's here, and it's really sort of just stopped me in my tracks. And it's sort of, we've had to adjust now and do our show remotely. So, you know, you don't have that thing of going to the studio on a Monday morning, which got you in the right sort of frame of mind. So we're just trying to adjust Outlook and see how we do and see what happens with COVID, what's going to develop. But I'd like to keep going with this. And Brian and I think, do good work together. You know, we live separately and we need our space as siblings, adult siblings. But at the same time, we do good work, good team. And we have, like, you know, thanks for having us on here. We have a certain story that is, you know, made up of the both of us and sort of how we've come along individually and siblings who've sort of shown each other the way. So I hope we can keep things going. We'll have to see, I guess. I
got to ask before we let you guys go for today, were there any big sibling pranks that you guys played on each other as blind people?
On April Fool's Day once, I let Kerry's guide dog outside and then told her I didn't know where her dog went. And she freaked out for a couple minutes. And then I can't remember back inside or what happened.
Man,
I think he did. I think eventually he just let her in.
Wow. Kerry,
yeah, I mean, that's our biggest blindness one, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, everything else is more, you know, what siblings normally do. Like,
sure,
you know, as the big sister, he often listened to me and believed what I was saying. So I would tell him things that weren't true, you know, and he'd believe me. And then years later, I'd say, you know, that thing I started when I was 9 and you were 6, you know, that was just silly. But things like that have nothing to do with blindness. But then you do have those, you know, pranks that involve guide dogs.
Guys, do you have a website for your radio show and for your podcast that we can share with other folks?
We do have recordings of our radio show, and you can find that at soundcloud.com/Outlook on Radio Western. You can also find us on Facebook too at Outlook on Radio Western.
Brian and Kerry, thanks very much for spending some time with us here on Blind Like Me. All the best to you guys with life and with Outlook, and I look forward to seeing what you guys are going to be doing going forward.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Blind Like Me. If you have a comment or suggestion about future casts, drop us an email to blindlikeme@outlook.com. Blind Like Me is a TimBlackOnAir.com production.